Okay, so today I'm going to be showing you how to use vinyl to paint on surfaces. Our surface today is going to be a little mini rolling pin. We're actually going to be making this one. I will also be making these as well. This one says family and happiness. Okay, so there are two ways to use vinyl when you are going to paint on a surface. The first way is to use it as a vinyl stencil, and the other way is to use a vinyl decal. So the difference between the two is this one, I have the blue background, which is your vinyl, that is your stencil. And I have gone through and I have weeded out the letters for faith. And on this one, I have weeded out the background and left the actual letters in vinyl. So the first and most common way that people will use vinyl to paint on surfaces is they will use it as a stencil, just like this. And the way you would do that, let's say you wanted a rolling pin that had a green background with faith written in black. You would take your rolling pin or your sign board, whatever it is that you're going to be painting on, and you would paint the background or the pin itself in green. So your background is green. And then you would go ahead and put your stencil on, and then you would paint your stencil with black paint. And then once you peel your stencil up, what you're left with is a green background with faith painted in black. So that is the stencil method, and that's usually the most common way that people will paint surfaces. It works really well. You're more susceptible to getting bleeds because sometimes you will have the paint that gets underneath the stencil. So there are a few things that you can do, and I'll go over that in this video in order to prevent that from happening so much. But this works really well. I do it all the time. When you have thinner fonts like this and they're smaller, usually, that tends to bleed a little bit more than if you have like a really big design. But it's definitely doable. Like I said, I do this all the time. But if I can, I prefer to do the PVPP method, which is where you're using a decal. So the way you use this and what we're going to be doing today is you would take your surface and you would paint the background whatever color you want the letters to be. So for this situation, I want the letters to be stained just like this one. Okay, so I would paint my surface or stain my surface in this case because I want it to be stained letters. And then I would apply my decal. And then I would paint over top of it whatever color I want the background to be. In this case, I want it to be white. So I would put my sticker decal on here, and then I would paint the whole thing white, paint right over top of this and over the entire pin, or at least the area that I want to be white, so not the handles. And then once it dries, I can peel up these letters and you'll see the stain where the letters were. So then you end up with this as your finished product. Okay, so to go over a little bit about vinyl, you have, this one doesn't have transfer tape on it, okay, but usually you would. And this one does, it's hard to see on the camera, but what you have is you will have your transfer tape on top. You will have your vinyl as your second layer, so you can see the H right there, it's stuck to the transfer tape, and then you have your background, or sorry, your backing piece right here. So it's kind of like a sticker. The goal is to, when you get your decal or your stencil, when you start to peel up your transfer tape, you want that to be sticking on, you want the decal to be sticking onto your transfer tape. You no longer want it on your backing. So a way to help with that process is to grab, if you have a credit card, this is a squeegee, but if you don't have one, you can just use a credit card. And what you want to do, turn this down a little bit, you want to go over top of your decal and just squeegee it really quick or burnish it. Do the front and the back side. So this is okay because we have transfer tape on top of the vinyl. If it were like this, where we didn't have transfer tape on it, you wouldn't want to run something like this over top of it because you run the risk of snagging one of the edges. In that case, you could put something over top of it, like a piece of paper or something, and then you could just burnish it. But you will always have transfer tape on top of your stencil until you actually put it on your surface. So now what you're going to do is you're going to grab a corner and you're going to peel your stencil back. You want to make sure that as you're going, your stencil's coming off onto the transfer tape. If for any reason it still wants to stick on your backing, a lot of times, like if I were doing this one right here, the little center of the A might want to stick on the transfer tape, on the backing still. So what you would do is you would just lay it back down and just do a finger press give it a good rub, and then you can, more than likely at that point, it will stick. If it doesn't, try it again. If you're still having an issue with it, I just turn it over to where my transfer tape is on bottom. And then as I'm pulling the backing, I'll just take my fingernail and kind of push the vinyl onto the tape. And that usually, just to kind of get it started. And once it's stuck on there a little bit, as you continue to pull, it'll stick on there the rest of the way. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and I've removed the backing from my transfer tape and vinyl stencil, or sorry, vinyl decal. And then you want to take your rolling pin and just try to put it on there as straight as you can. When you're making larger pieces, you can grab a ruler, draw lines with a pencil on it, whatever it is that you need to do to make sure it's straight. But with little ones like this, it's pretty simple just to kind of put it on there. It's usually pretty straight. So I usually will just kind of tap it on there a little bit, and then I'll hold it up and take a look at it. I feel like I could adjust this a little bit. That way you can reposition it. If you put the entire decal down and push it really hard, it's gonna, you might not be able to pull it back up again and reposition it. Still, I think keep putting that on there a little crooked. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So once you have it on there the way you like it, then you can go ahead and push it down. And this is when I usually use my finger and just go over top of it like this. You could use a squeegee or a credit card, but because it's a rounded surface, it's easier just to use your finger. I'm actually gonna point this down so you can see a little bit better. Okay. Okay, so once you feel like you've got that on there pretty good, go ahead and grab a corner. And the secret to taking off the transfer tape, you don't want to pull straight up as you're pulling it off. You want to like kind of roll it over. See if I can get a little bit closer. You want to roll it off, okay? But you see how when I go to roll it, the F is coming up on the transfer tape. Sometimes you have to kind of just take your finger and push it back down. Okay, just to kind of get it started. And I'm not gonna lie, when you use stain on a surface, a lot of times the vinyl doesn't want to stick to it as well. So if I had painted this surface first, I could probably just kind of rip this off pretty easily. But because I stained it, it likes to be a little bit more temperamental. And by the way, I've let this dry for probably 3 or 4 days now. There's no way you're getting a vinyl decal or stencil on a freshly stained, within 24 hours surface. I've never had luck with that. So, okay, so as I'm going, this is kind of being a pain for me. But you can see each letter still wants to stick to the transfer tape. So on a regular surface, you could just push it down with your finger and then it should come right off. But because this is stained, I know that's probably not going to be sufficient. So I'm just kind of grabbing, holding down one edge when I get started, and then I'm able to pull the rest off. Okay. Yeah, that was a little bit of a bugger to get on there. Okay. Okay, so the transfer tape is now trash, and then just go through and push down your stencil really well. You just want to make sure that there aren't any corners or edges popping up. And even if it looks like it's adhered down really well, still go over top of it. This is a good time where you might want to burnish it again. So you would put something over top of it, and then you could go ahead and use your squeegee, but I usually typically just use my fingers to do it. Okay, so now you've got your decal on your pen, and I will take a little bit of Mod Podge to help adhere the stencil down. So you don't need a whole lot of Mod Podge. A little bit will go a long way. And you want just a very, very, very thin coat. So I usually go like this so I don't push up the stencil at all. You don't need a super thick coat of this stuff. You just want a little bit. This is just to help adhere the stencil down. That way you don't get as many bleeds. In fact, I rarely ever get bleeds when I use the Mod Podge. Another way that you could do it is if you, let's say your background was white, you could just put another coat of white paint over top before you painted the actual color that you're going to paint. That just helps adhere it down, just like the Mod Podge does. But Mod Podge is more like a glue. So either one works great. I've used both methods. Okay, so you just want to make sure you don't leave any clumps behind and that it's pretty smooth. And I usually give it about, I don't know, maybe a minute or so to dry. And then I can go ahead and get started painting. So I bought these little clips. They're awesome at the Dollar Tree. You get, I think, 6 or 8 of them for $1. So they work really well for these little mini rolling pins, and I always tend to find 1,000 other things to use them for. You can use it like that. Or not, but anyway, so it helps to be able to hold the rolling pin easily while you're painting. Okay, so now I'm going to use, for Faith, let's see what color, I'll use the white. So I'm just gonna paint one pin with you guys today, and that way you don't have to sit here while I paint all of them, because you can get the point with just one. Okay, so now you're gonna paint over top. Again, just a light coat is all you need. Doesn't need to be super thick or anything like that. It's better to do several thin coats. Like, with white, I typically have to do 3 or 4. With darker colors, 2 is enough. But it's better to do thinner coats and make sure you don't have any clumps or, oops, that one looks like it's coming up. You don't want any clumps or streaks. So thin coats are always best. And if you're using chalk paint like I am, it dries really fast. So by the time you're done putting your first coat on, you can usually go back and start on your second coat, which is nice. It also looks pretty awful with your first coat. So don't let that scare you if you've never used chalk paint before and this is your first time. Okay, so you guys get the point. I'm just painting all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and then I'll show you when it's time to take off the decal. So I have finished all my painting. So right here, I switched out my clamps. I got some bigger ones because those little guys weren't working on the table that I'm working on. But anyway, so here it is already painted. And usually what I do at this point, while I still have my decal on, I will take a little bit of sandpaper. This is 400 grit. I usually use a very fine grit sandpaper when I'm going over top of vinyl. Plus it just makes the paint really smooth. So I just do like a light little sanding just to make sure, if there's any uneven ridges or it doesn't feel very smooth, I like it to look and feel really smooth. So I usually would just go over it really quickly with a very fine grit sandpaper. And then of course you'll want to wipe it off. Get all the dust off of it. Okay, so now to remove the decal, I will use a pair of sharp tweezers. So these are pretty sharp. I don't know if you can see that. Sometimes I use an X-Acto knife. I prefer the tweezers, but the X-Acto knife works as well. Just make sure when you go to take the stencil off, you're not digging like, at a 90-degree angle. You want to go into it as flat as possible so you don't gouge out any of the wood or the paint that you just painted. So anyway, like I said, I like to use these. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I will just grab on top of the vinyl and I will grab the end of it, and then I can just pull it up like that. Okay. Move this down a little bit. So like I said, sometimes you'll get little bleeds, and if that's the case, I'm going to show you guys how to fix those. And make sure that when you're painting, you try not to get a bunch of globs and streaks throughout your paint. Like I said, if you get some, that's okay. You can kind of sand those out at the end. And a little bit's okay because, you know, this is a farmhouse rolling pin, so it wouldn't look horrible if it had a little bit of that going on, but you don't want an excessive amount. Okay. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Had a little bit of bleeding right at the very tip top of the A. You probably can't even really see it on camera. But anyway, when you do have some bleeding, you have some white where your letters are, where you shouldn't have white, you can just take an X-Acto knife and just very gently scrape at it. If you scrape too hard, you'll take off the stain as well, which isn't a big deal if you can restain it. But if you do it very lightly, then you can do just enough to get the paint off and not damage the stain at all. Okay, so that looks really good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some twine, I'm going to wrap around the edge and put a bow on it, kind of like the ones I showed you at the beginning, just like that. And then I'll do, you know, a white or an off-white color twine for the green, and then I'm doing the jute twine again for happiness. So anyway, I hope that helps and that those directions were pretty clear on how to use the vinyl stencils. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks so much.